Most people think when someone leaves religion, it's loud, arguments, anger, rebellion. But that's not how it usually happens. The smartest people, they don't announce it, they don't debate it, they don't try to convert anyone, they just go quiet. And that silence isn't weakness, it's a signal. Because what actually pulls intelligent people away from religion isn't hatred, or trauma, or temptation. It's something far more unsettling. In this video, we're breaking down 7 reasons smart people leave religion silently, not to attack belief, but to understand the psychology behind quiet disbelief. And by the end, you may realize why silence is often the final, most honest conclusion. They stop arguing because they outgrow the game. At the beginning, doubt is noisy. It shows up as late-night debates, bookmarked videos, half-remembered verses pulled out like weapons. Questioning feels urgent because it still believes the argument matters. There is a quiet hope that if the right point is made, if the logic is sharp enough, something will finally click. So smart people argue. They argue with friends. They argue online. Sometimes they argue in their own head, rehearsing conversations that never actually happen. It feels productive. It feels brave. It feels like progress. But then, something changes. Not all at once. Not dramatically. More like a slow realization that settles in and refuses to leave. They begin to notice that most religious arguments are not about evidence at all. They are about loyalty, about belonging, about protecting a story that gives someone meaning. Truth is rarely what is being defended. Identity is. Once that realization lands, the entire game looks different. You can win every logical point and still lose the conversation. You can dismantle an argument perfectly and watch the other person cling even harder. The smarter you get, the clearer it becomes that persuasion is not the goal on the other side. And that is when arguing starts to feel strange, almost childish, like trying to win a chess match where the rules change every time you make a good move. Every answer loops back to the same place: faith, authority, mystery. When logic gets too close, the conversation simply exits the rational world. There is no final square to reach, no conclusion that is allowed to stand, so they stop. Not because they were defeated, not because they ran out of answers, but because they saw the ceiling. They saw exactly how far thinking was permitted to go before it became threatening. Arguing no longer feels like courage. It feels like noise, like shouting into fog and pretending the echoes are progress. And when that illusion collapses, silence is not surrender, it is maturity. This is the first quiet step away. Not a rejection of truth, but a refusal to keep playing a game that was never designed to be won. They notice the questions you're not allowed to ask. Every belief system has borders, even the ones that claim infinite truth. At first, those borders feel reassuring. They tell you where safety is. They tell you where certainty lives. Stay inside, and everything makes sense. For a while, that feels like protection. But intelligent minds are pattern seekers, and sooner or later, they notice something subtle and unsettling. The boundaries are not random. The questions you are discouraged from asking are not trivial ones. They are the most important ones. Not questions about behavior. Those are welcomed. Not questions about obedience. Those are encouraged. The forbidden questions are always deeper, foundational, structural. Why this God and not another, when geography predicts belief better than truth ever could? Why revelation happened once, long ago, in a specific culture, and then mysteriously stopped? Why moral rules are presented as eternal, yet seem to bend and reshape themselves every time society changes? At first, these questions feel dangerous to even think, not because they are complex, but because of the reaction they provoke. The tension in the room, the sudden shift in tone, the gentle warnings disguised as concern. Be careful with that question. You're overthinking. Some things are not meant to be understood. That is when curiosity turns into a liability. Smart people notice that the system does not collapse under attack. It tightens, it redirects, it labels the questioner instead of answering the question. Doubt becomes a character flaw rather than a rational response. And that creates a quiet fracture. Because once you realize a belief cannot be examined at its foundation, you are no longer dealing with truth. You are dealing with protection, with maintenance, with fear of inspection. So they adapt. They stop asking out loud. They stop pushing against the walls. Not because the questions disappeared, but because they learned the cost of asking them publicly. Silence becomes strategy, survival, a way to think freely without triggering alarms. Instead of fighting the system head-on, they step just far enough outside it to breathe, to observe, to notice how often forbidden questions point directly at the weakest parts of belief. And once you see that pattern, you cannot unsee it. Because if truth welcomes inquiry, why does belief flinch at it? And that realization does not explode. It settles quietly. But the real fracture is still ahead. They see morality exist without belief. Religion often presents itself as the source of goodness, as if morality needs authorization, as if compassion only counts when it is sanctioned from above. For a long time, that idea feels natural, especially when it is taught early and repeated often. But smart people watch behavior more than claims. They start noticing something quietly disturbing. Kindness shows up in people who do not believe. Not performative kindness, not strategic politeness, but real empathy. The kind that costs something and expects nothing in return. It exists without prayer, without doctrine, without fear of punishment. At the same time, cruelty appears inside belief systems that claim moral superiority, not accidental cruelty, justified cruelty, harm wrapped in sacred language, pain explained away as obedience, suffering reframed as divine will. This contrast is hard to ignore once seen. They notice atheists who risk themselves for strangers, believers who turn away from suffering because the rules say they must, entire moral instincts overridden by loyalty to scripture or tradition, and slowly, an uncomfortable question forms. If morality truly comes from religion, why does it appear so reliably in its absence? And why does it sometimes vanish in its presence? This realization does not arrive with drama. There is no thunder, no moment of rebellion. It settles quietly, like a weight shifting inside the mind, a contradiction that refuses to be dismissed. Because once morality is observed as a human capacity rather than a divine lease, belief loses one of its strongest justifications. Goodness no longer needs a gatekeeper. It does not need permission. That is when belief starts to feel optional. Not false, not evil, just unnecessary for doing what feels right. And this is where many people misunderstand what is happening. They assume the break is ethical, that the issue is rules versus values. But the deepest crack is not moral at all. It is psychological, because when morality is no longer outsourced to authority, responsibility returns to the individual. There is no higher command to hide behind, no text to absorb the blame. Choice becomes personal, and that is far more unsettling than any moral debate. Belief did not just offer guidance, it offered relief from responsibility. Once that is seen, the shift is irreversible, and the silence grows deeper. They recognize fear as the foundation. Hell, judgment, eternal consequences. These ideas are introduced softly, often early, wrapped in gentle language. They are rarely presented as threats. They are framed as love, as concern, as a warning meant to save, not to scare. But smart people listen beneath the wording. They notice how often fear is the invisible engine, the quiet pressure behind obedience, the unspoken consequence that keeps belief in place long after certainty has faded. They begin to ask a dangerous question. Would this belief survive without fear? Not with fear softened, not rebranded, removed entirely. Take away punishment, take away eternal stakes, take away the idea that a wrong thought or doubt could cost you forever. What remains? Would devotion still be there? Would rituals still feel necessary? Would belief still feel urgent? This question changes everything. Because when fear is stripped out, much of what once felt sacred suddenly feels fragile. Practices lose their intensity, rules lose their urgency, the emotional grip weakens, and that is when compliance starts to look less like devotion and more like conditioning. Smart people recognize the pattern. They see how fear shapes behavior more effectively than truth ever could, how it discourages exploration, how it turns doubt into danger, how it rewards submission while punishing curiosity. Once fear is recognized as a foundation rather than a side effect, it loses power. Not instantly. Fear rarely disappears all at once, but it begins to loosen. The nightmares fade first, then the reflexive guilt, then the constant self-monitoring. Each layer peels back slowly, quietly. And yet, even at this stage, most do not leave loudly. Because fear is not the only thing holding belief together. There is still community, family, history, reputation. Leaving publicly would ignite conflict that serves no one. So, they stay quiet. They keep their distance internally while maintaining appearances externally. They choose discretion over confrontation, not because they are afraid of the truth, but because they understand the cost of exposing it. And that cost leads directly to the next reason. They understand the social cost of honesty. Religion is rarely just an idea. It is woven into family dinners, childhood memories, weddings, funerals, and holidays. It shows up in the language people use, the values they share, the way they recognize one another as safe or familiar. Belief becomes belonging. Smart people understand this early. They see that leaving is not simply changing a thought. It is pulling on a thread that holds many relationships together. And once pulled, it does not stop neatly. So they calculate consequences, not out of cowardice, but out of clarity. They imagine the conversations that would follow honesty, the long explanations that go nowhere, the forced concern disguised as love, the subtle shift in how they are seen, no longer trusted, no longer fully inside the circle. They know what truth costs in social currency. Lost relationships that never recover. Family members who see disbelief as a personal failure. Friends who suddenly treat them like a project, or worse, a threat. Being labeled broken, arrogant, lost, dangerous. Not because of what they do, but because of what they no longer affirm. So, they choose restraint over chaos. Silence over spectacle. They do not feel the need to announce their departure. There is no ceremony, no confrontation, no dramatic exit. They simply stop centering their life around something that no longer feels true. This silence is often misunderstood as dishonesty, but it is not about lying, it is about timing, about choosing when truth actually helps and when it only wounds. They are not trying to win an argument, they are trying to preserve peace, and that peace is real. At first, life becomes calmer, conversations become easier, the pressure lifts. There is space to think without constant defense. But peace comes with a strange side effect, because once you stop being honest publicly, you begin living in two layers, one outward, one inward, and holding those layers apart requires energy. Silence protects relationships, but it also isolates. It creates distance, even in closeness. You can be surrounded by people and still feel unseen. That is the new problem peace creates, and it pushes the silence even deeper. They realize identity doesn't need a label. Religion offers more than answers. It offers a ready-made self, a name, a role, a place in the story. For a long time, that feels grounding. You do not have to ask who you are. The label answers for you. But intelligent people eventually feel the weight of that convenience. They notice how much of their identity was pre-selected, what to believe, how to speak, which doubts are acceptable, which values count, and which ones are suspect. The label simplifies life, but it also narrows it. Over time, that narrowing becomes uncomfortable. They no longer want answers handed down like heirlooms. They want understanding earned through experience, reflection, and evidence. They want to know not just what to think, but why it makes sense. And that shift changes everything. They stop needing a banner to stand under. They stop measuring themselves by belief or disbelief. Those categories begin to feel shallow, even distracting, as if the label matters more than the person wearing it. Silence becomes a kind of freedom. Without a label, there is nothing to defend, no doctrine to protect, no identity to perform. Life becomes quieter, but also more honest. Values are lived, not announced. Ethics are practiced, not advertised. They show up as decent human beings without needing a name for it. This quiet way of living unsettles people far more than rebellion ever could. Rebellion fits into the story. It confirms expectations. It gives others something to push against. Silence does not. When someone lives well without the label, it raises uncomfortable questions. If identity does not need belief, what was the belief really doing? If meaning can exist without affiliation, what holds the group together? So instead of arguing, intelligent people simply exist. Calm, grounded, unapologetic, no declarations, no speeches, just alignment between values and behavior. And that quiet confidence speaks louder than any protest. Which brings us to the final reason. They accept that truth doesn't need applause. Smart people do not leave religion to crown themselves with a new certainty. They are not searching for another system that promises final answers. If anything, they are learning to live without them. They leave to make peace with uncertainty, At first, uncertainty feels like loss. No clear map, no guaranteed meaning, no authority to lean on when life becomes overwhelming. But over time, something unexpected happens. Uncertainty stops feeling like chaos and starts feeling like honesty. They accept not knowing, not as a failure, but as a realistic response to a complex world. They accept ambiguity without rushing to fill the silence with explanations that feel comforting but untrue. They stop forcing meaning to arrive fully formed. Instead, they create it. Meaning becomes something built through relationships, choices, and responsibility rather than something inherited and protected. It is shaped by experience, not dictated by tradition, and because it is chosen, it feels more fragile, but also more real. Once you reach this place, the need for validation disappears. There is nothing to prove, no audience required, no announcement that needs to be made. Truth no longer feels like a performance. It does not need applause, agreement, or approval. That is why the departure is quiet. There is no victory lap because no one was defeated. There is no rejection ceremony because nothing is being replaced. There is only alignment. Thought finally matches honesty. Inner life finally matches outward behavior, even if that alignment remains private. From the outside, this silence can look empty, like something is missing, like belief has been stripped away and nothing was put in its place. But that is a misunderstanding. The silence is not emptiness. It is resolution. It is the sound of a mind no longer at war with itself. The quiet that comes when you stop pretending certainty is required to live a meaningful life. And once you hear that silence, you understand why so many smart people leave without saying a word. When smart people leave religion silently, it is not an act of rejection. It is refinement, a careful shedding of what no longer fits. Not anger, but clarity. Not rebellion, but responsibility for one's own thinking. They do not trade faith for arrogance. They trade certainty for integrity. They accept the discomfort of not knowing rather than the comfort of borrowed answers. And maybe that is the most unsettling truth of all. Because silence forces us to confront something we rarely want to face. What if belief does not collapse under attack? What if it does not need to be destroyed at all? What if it simply fades when examined honestly and patiently? That possibility is far more disturbing than any argument. So, if this video made you pause, even briefly, if it made you question not belief itself, but the reasons you were given for holding it, then stay curious. Question gently. Think deeply. And if you value truth over comfort and honesty over certainty, subscribe, because the quiet thinkers are not shouting for the future, they are shaping it.